Hi, everybody. Brad Truax from Eastman's Woodlands Wildlife Committee. Today, we're going to talk about little critters. We've often talked about. We've shown some previous videos of our various wildlife here at Eastman, where we have a medium-sized mammal that has a small mammal in its mouth. So somebody's got to be at the bottom of the food chain. So who are these small mammals? Well, we're really talking about mice, voles, moles, and shrews. Uh, the white-footed mouse is probably the most common rodent that we see here at Eastman. They're usually about 3 to 4 inches long, and their tail's about the same length. And their fur is a grayish brown or a reddish brown. They have a white belly, and as their name implies, they have white feet. Uh, so again, the white-footed mouse is technically different from the deer mouse, and once again, it's the most common rodent that we have here at Eastman. They usually only weigh about an ounce. We already talked about what their fur and their belly and feet look like. Their preferred habitat is dry deciduous forest or mixed woodland. So Eastman is particularly good habitat for the white-footed mouse. And they can also climb trees and bushes, and they're good swimmers. They build their nests in warm, dry places like abandoned bird or squirrel nests, or in hollow trees, or in brush piles, or old stoneworks. You probably recall we've shown uh, several images of either bobcats or foxes sitting on top of some of Eastman's old stone walls. And they're sitting there because they're looking for these small mammals that are living inside the stoneworks. These mice can also build nests inside your homes, particularly in attics, chimneys, and basements, particularly in the winter months. And white-footed mouse are omnivores. They eat seeds, nuts, insects, but they'll also eat berries and fungi. And most of their activity is nocturnal. In preparation for the winter, they will store food during the fall months. And they don't hibernate, but they may become torpid during a few days when the winter weather is particularly severe. And they spend a great deal of time in trees in winter. Winter is also when they're most likely to seek shelter in your basement or other parts of your house. And the families tend to nest together during the winter, so they may huddle together in groups of 2 to 6, basically to conserve energy. And sometimes they'll line their nests with any soft, fluffy material that they can find, and they do that basically to insulate the nests. And they tend to store food in caches, often in an abandoned bird or squirrel nest. And they're more likely than voles or shrews to walk on top of the snow rather than under it in the winter, but they also build networks of tunnels in the subnivean zone. You remember the subnivean zone is that area just underneath the snow and above the ground. It's a popular area for these small mammals in the wintertime. So they breed from March to October, and they'll have 2 to 4 litters per year, each with 2 to 9 offspring. And one mouse can have up to 36 babies in a year. That's really an incredible number. And that last litter is usually weaned and dispersed in the fall months, just before they get ready for the winter. So the mice, again, are an important part of the food chain. So they have lots of predators. Those predators can include house cats, bobcats, foxes, weasels, hawks, falcons, owls, even large lizards or snakes can eat some of these mice. And since the mice are primarily nocturnal, those predators that are out hunting at dusk and dawn or at night are especially likely to eat mice. And the average life expectancy of the white-footed mouse is only 1 to 2 years. White-footed mouse is the primary vector for the black-legged tick, and you'll remember from our discussions on ticks that they can transmit a lot of diseases, Lyme disease being the most well-known. But there are other diseases they can transmit: Powassan disease, babesiosis, anaplasmosis, and the most newly recognized Borrelia miyamotoi disease. And the white-footed mouse can also carry hantaviruses, which can cause serious pulmonary disease in humans. You may see mouse tracks in the snow, and they tend to have this classic zipper pattern. So What happens is as they jump along, remember they tend to have a bounding gait. So all four paws tend to leave an impression in the snow. And then as they drag their tail, the tail will leave an impression in between these tracks, and it leaves a zipper-like pattern. So you can see this looks like a zipper. This is showing the four paws. Again, all mice have four toes on the front foot and five on the back foot. So here, because they have a bounding pattern, you can kind of see what this would look like. And once again, this is showing that bounding pattern, particularly over here, you can see the impression of 4 feet as they move along in this bounding pattern. Then over here on the right side, you can see where they start dragging their tail, and that leaves this kind of classic zipper-like pattern. Here you can see it a little bit better. This is an enlargement of the previous slide. So here are the 4 feet and showing in the bounding pattern. And then over here, he's starting to drag his tail. So you see the classic zipper-like pattern. Voles are also small rodents. They're often known as meadow mice or field mice, and they're only about 5 to 8 inches long, and their average survival is only about 3 to 6 months. Once again, they're small rodents. They usually only weigh about an ounce or so. There are actually several species, but the most common one here is the meadow vole. And again, you may also know them as field mice or meadow mice. And as the name implies, meadow voles like a grassland habitat. They are active year round, and they may be active at night or during the day. And they live in nests that are constructive of woven grass, or they live in burrows. And they may store food in the burrows and breed and sleep in those burrows. They eat any available species of grasses. They'll also eat sedges and forbs. You remember forbs are grass-like things that have flowers on them. They'll also eat agricultural crops, and then they'll also eat insects and snails, or they may scavenge animal remains. They eat very every 2 to 3 hours, but the average lifespan for the voles is only 3 to 6 months. They rarely live longer than 12 months. But they're very productive. They can have 5 to 10 litters per year, though, because they have such a short lifespan, an average of 2 litters is much more typical in any year. They do have an ecological value. They are a key part of the food chain for predators, very important part of the food chain. And they can also disperse mycorrhizal fungi and grass nutrients in their feces. And after a disruptive event like a forest or meadow fire, the meadow vole's activities actually contribute significantly to restoration of the habitat. So there are many predators of the vole. The eastern meadow voles are an important prey for a variety of avian species: hawks, owls, gulls, ravens, crows, even great blue herons, and obviously for many mammalian carnivores. And some large snakes may also eat the voles. The major mammalian predators include short-tailed shrews, badgers, skunks, weasels, martens, foxes, mountain lions, here bobcats, and even domestic dogs and cats. Meadow vole tracks in the snow are a little bit different than what we saw with the white-footed mouse. Meadow voles tend to leave a trotting pattern or an alternate pattern, and they also have direct registration. You'll remember in our talks about tracks, direct registration is when the front foot and the back foot land in the same spot. Direct registration is a way that they actually conserve energy. So this over here is showing the typical alternate or trotting pattern that the voles would have. And usually their tail doesn't leave an imprint. Remember, the white-footed mouse typically leaves an imprint with the tail that gives that zipper-like pattern. We tend not to see a tail imprint with the voles. But the voles also frequently travel in the subnivean region. So again, they create tunnels that are underneath the snow. Here you're seeing the raised area of a tunnel. And here's some meadow vole tracks in mud. Again, You can just kind of barely see them here. And again, unlike the mouse, they usually don't leave impression from their tail. But if they're frightened, they might have a bounding gait pattern similar to what we see with the mouse. Shrews are not often seen. This is the northern short-tailed shrew, which is probably the only shrew we have here at Eastman. And their tracks are what often tell us of their presence because we seldom actually see them. And they prefer to tunnel along or below the ground in the leaf litter or in that subnivean zone in the wintertime. Shrews are actually one of the very few venomous mammals. They're actually not rodents. They're in the category of insectivores, which also includes moles and bats. And they have sharp, spiky teeth, which is another difference from rodents. If you remember, rodents typically have a couple sets of incisors. And the shrews are slightly smaller than a mouse. They might be 4 to 5 inches long. They weigh about an ounce. And they eat primarily insects and worms, spiders, ants, beetles, slugs, centipedes, moths, and other invertebrates that might be living in the layer of organic matter that's on the floor of the forest. But if they encounter a mouse or an immature chipmunk or a vole or even a bird, they might attack it and bite it and introduce a mouthful of their very toxic saliva. They may then follow the scent trail that's left by that wounded animal and eventually come upon the carcass of the animal once the animal has died. And they may spend a day or two basically eating that dead animal. And they can also eat fungi and seeds. And shrews often hoard food, particularly in the fall and the winter, or during times of abundance of prey. So shrews are active both day and night, and they have these bouts of frenzied activities. They'll run around for about 5 minutes, and then it's followed by very long periods of resting. So the total active time during a typical day is only about 16%. Shrews are usually very solitary and very territorial. And though they're small, some consider them to be amongst the most voracious mammalian predators, mainly because of their ability to inject that venom into other animals that are a little bit bigger than themselves. The preferred habitat for the shrew are areas with moist leaf litter or thick plant cover. And their habitat can include grasslands, old fields, marshy areas, deciduous and coniferous forests, and even household gardens. And a typical shrew nest might be about 8 inches in diameter underground or underneath a log. And they may line their nests with either leaves or the fur of a meadow vole. And the nest is usually kept clean, and they usually deposit their waste outside the nest in a latrine area. And other parts of the burrow system might be used for storing food. Once again, they're usually solitary. And in winter, they spend a lot of their time in the subnivean zone. They can have 2 to 3 litters per year of 6 to 8 babies. There are lots of predators. Remember, shrews are an important part of the food chain. And those predators can include fox, house cats, bobcats, weasels, skunks, raccoons, opossums, even large trout if they're near water, or snakes and raptors like owls. And they can try to escape predators by remaining hidden under the vegetation, in the leaf litter, or under the snow. And they also produce a musky smell from their anal scent glands that can deter some predators. But they don't live very long. Again, about 90% of them may die during the winter due to either the cold or scant food. This is showing shrew tracks in the snow. Remember, we said they have these periods of very hectic activity. They seldom move in a straight line. They usually move around erratically in waving, coiling patterns. And here you can actually see the pattern that was left by a shrew. So again, a very wavy, coiling sort of pattern. Here you see it in the blow up of that picture. So once again, goes up, down, around, kind of around. So kind of during these periods of hectic activity, they will actually have a very erratic pattern. And this is, again, the shrews have 5 toes on the front feet, 5 on the back feet. That's different than the mouse, which only had 4 toes on one of its feet, 5 on the other. And they tend to, again, the shrews tend to move in these erratic lines. Life in the subnivean zone is pretty incredible. Again, a whole variety of these small mammals will move around in these tunnels that they create in the subnivean zone. And that includes, again, the voles, the mice, and the shrews. And this picture was taken after a thaw. And what you see here is this incredibly complex system of tunnels that had been created in the subnivean zone. So again, there's a lot of life that goes on underneath the snow cover. Moles are the last small mammal we'll talk about. Moles really aren't part of the food chain, and that's because they're subterranean mammals. They spend almost their whole life underground. They have very small eyes. They don't need good vision because they're underground all the time, and they have no external ears. And their bodies and paws are really built for digging, so that you can see their body is kind of cylindrical, and they have these very unique hands, which we'll talk about in a minute. So they live underground. So their habitats are in meadows or grasslands, woodlands, wetlands, and riparian habitats. Riparian habitats are basically shoreline habitats, and they have these cylindrical bodies and small eyes. They don't need good vision. They have no external ears. They have very sensitive snouts, and they have short hind limbs, but their short forelimbs are very powerful, and they have large clawed paws that are adapted for digging. And we'll show you a picture of those in a minute. So most moles are about 5 to 7 inches long, and they're solitary, and they seldom leave their tunnels. They basically can live underground better than most mammals because they have a unique type of hemoglobin that basically allows them to utilize oxygen much more efficiently and to tolerate higher levels of carbon dioxide that occur underground. And they have an extra thumb adjacent to their regular thumb, and this helps them in digging. I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. And though they're omnivores, their diet consists mostly of earthworms, and they will eat some other small invertebrates that they find in the soil. And their saliva also contains a toxin that can paralyze the earthworms. So the moles are actually able to store their still living prey and consume them later on. And they often store them in underground larders in the tunnels that they create. So this is showing this extra thumb. The moles typically have 4 fingers plus a thumb. And then they have this extra thing over here. That extra thumb really is an elongated part of their wrist bone. And it really serves to produce extra surface that really helps them when they're digging. So again, it serves a very important function. So you've all heard the saying, "Don't make a mountain out of a molehill." Well, this is showing molehills. The moles burrow and they raise molehills. All that dirt they dig up has to go somewhere. So it shows up as these, multiple piles of dirt. And a mole can actually dig a 160-foot burrow in just one night. And this is showing uh, how tunnels can actually ruin some lawns and gardens. How many of you can remember what other animal commonly may dig up your lawn looking for basically slugs? Yep, that's right, the skunk. Okay, so what do moles eat? Well, their favorite food is earthworms. So here we have a mole that's eating a worm. Probably 90% of what they eat are worms. And they'll also eat slugs and grubs, but they'll also eat ants, centipedes, millipedes, snails, termites, beetles, crickets, anything that you might find in the ground. Mole tracks, you're probably not going to see them. They must be extremely rare because the moles spend all their time in their underground tunnels. In fact, we couldn't even find a single photo of actual mole footprints. So all we could find is basically a diagram of what they might look like. So they'd have five digits on both the front and the rear paws. And I suspect that if they were to leave a print, you might see that extra appendage that we call the extra thumb might be expected to be in their print. So in wintertime, moles don't hibernate. They remain active all winter. They simply dig deeper underground to escape the cold. And you might still be able to see molehills through the snow, but you won't see any mole tracks because they're digging so deep under the snow. They're not going to be on top of the snow. Moles actually have very few predators. Why? Because they're underground. They're out of sight. Nobody can see them. And in addition, they are capable of secreting a musky odored secretion from their scent glands on their stomach, and that can further deter some predators. But if they were able to come upon moles as prey, hawks, owls, foxes, coyotes, weasels, raccoons, skunks, martens, and even pet dogs and cats might be able to prey upon them if given the chance. Humans are actually probably the biggest threat to mole survival since we try to get rid of them when they're digging up our lawns and gardens. So that's a little bit about little critters that are part of the food chain here at Eastman. Hope you've gotten something out of this.